Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all enjoy the coffee break. Thanks again to Dr. Martin Stopford for addressing challenges we are facing as an industry in general, as well as the actions need to be taken. Now, it is time to dig deeper by involving more stakeholders, such as shipowners, operators, maritime insurances, and consultancy, so that we can hear perspective on how the challenge will impact and be met by various industry stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce the moderator, who is sitting closest to me for the first panel discussion, Challenges of Maritime Industry. Mr. Hugo Wynn-Williams is the chairman of Thomas Miller, an international provider of market-leading insurance services. Their mutual insurance portfolio includes the management of YKIP Club, TT Club, and ITIC. Mr. Wynn-Williams has been a member of Thomas Miller Holding Board since 1999 and was elected chairman of Thomas Miller Holdings in June 2009. In this capacity, he has oversight of Thomas Miller's numerous international businesses. He was also the CEO of YKIP Club from 2004 to 2018, the chairman of International Group of PI Clubs from 2015 to 2018. He's now ready to lead the panel. Thank you for accepting this role. You may have the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And I'd like to add my congratulations to Yokohama on their 160th. Most of my organizations can only manage 150 years, so we're in awe of the 160th. It's always difficult to follow Martin, but we're going to make an effort here, and I'm sure he's given you a lot to think about. WO56 for Slido. Please get your questions ready after we've done the first part. There have been a few changes to the panel since it was announced. More, I thought, than the Welsh 15 injuries. But luckily, unlike Wales, we have the equivalent of the brave Blossoms coming in, Martin, and the incredibly speedy and creative Tom sitting there, who's going to be jumping around in a moment. We're going to have a few presentations from everybody, at least three of the panelists. The two that you've heard Martin's, and Tom is going to give us a little a cappella later with a few ideas after Naito-san. But first I thought I'd put up a few slides, really just to prompt a few questions in your minds to put to the panel here. So these are really prompts for you. There's our panel. Now, challenges. This one, you may have thought, is all behind us, and indeed, sulfur, Martin referred to it as almost yesterday's problem. 2020 is upon us. But in a land far, far away in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Union of Greek Shipowners certainly don't believe it's all over. They're extremely concerned about the availability, the quality, and the cost of these fuels. And on the other side of that coin, scrubbers. Should we be worried about their resilience? The Guard P&I Club, their Hull side, recently put out a circular highlighting problems with corrosion. And we had the problem with the Oldendorf Bulker only a few months ago. So, and add to that, are they environmentally friendly? Your thoughts there. Getting to zero. Those are just some of the questions. Some of them come from the pre-papers out on the Global Maritime Forum, which will be in a week or so's time. But what will be the impact of the application of the Poseidon Principles and the Getting to Zero Coalition? It's all steps in the right direction. How far away is a genuine non-CO2 fuel solution? You heard from Martin a moment ago. And what are the fuels and technologies and supply chains needed to transition to a low-carbon future? Where's the money coming from? And how is it going to be deployed? And how can the policies be accelerated at local, national, and regional level to enable a rapid shift away? What role can the ports play in that? And can the industry come together with Maersk by targeting net zero CO2 emissions by 2050? That indeed is an ambitious step. Well, here's the visionary. This is the man. This is the end of globalization. He was ahead of Martin even on that. The future does not belong to globalists. Globalization exerted a religious pull over past leaders. Those days are over. The future belongs to the patriots. The future belongs to strong, independent nations. Well, I must say, the British people have got it right with Brexit, haven't they? We're announcing that we're a global trading nation now. Yet another odd effect of Brexit. But how will this affect shipping? The futurists would say the logistics chains are going to come very much lower. We'll be in short sea B2B. Cost of labor, we have robots to build the white goods now. Why don't we build them in every country? We can reduce the carbon very quickly by reducing the number of trading ships. And just a final point, of course, the visionary here has helped the tanker industry for the time being. 17 steps to a better world. New drivers for a successful company. Is it changing the old idea of capitalism? Are we moving to this sustainable model? And where can shipping find a place in it? Be that diversity or one's individual contribution to carbon emission. We ought really to total up the international people here, how many carbons we've been emitting going around the world in the past year to spread the gospel. It's not just Prince Harry. At least I didn't come on a private jet. I don't know about anyone else? No. Moving away for a moment, and if there were time, I'm sure if there are questions on the issue of safety, I put down ship recycling at the bottom here, because we mustn't forget the people. It's so easy in these conferences to forget for a moment the thousands of people who are operating these ships and working in the ports on shore. But ship recycling is a major issue, both in terms of the environmental impact and the people engaged in it. Digitalization. What are the current challenges? Can they help solve it? Martin's slides at the end gave a picture of the sort of areas that this can help. Just a small comment about blockchain. The take-up has been slow in shipping, with the exception of Maersk. And finally, if anyone has questions about the markets and where they're going, our happy days here again, or we'll be in for another period of misery. Why don't you ask the questions? So, with that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to our first panelist to make a short presentation, and that is Jeremy Nixon. Thank you. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Hugo, and great to be on this panel today, and really, really appreciate, and many, many congratulations to the Port of Yokohama on your 160th anniversary, and to Muraoka-san's great leadership in bringing together such a great event over the next couple of days, and with so many people involved with that. It's really tremendous. I was just going to briefly touch on just 3-4 topical issues to try and bring that together in line with Martin, in line with Hugo's comments. But I don't know whether Ocean Network Express or ONE needs any introduction, but as you're probably aware, we are the container shipping company that came together from K-Line, MOL, and NYK, consolidation of the 3 liner divisions, and we went live in 2018, and we're active in 110 countries in the world, and obviously very, very prominent here in Japan, where our shareholders are based, but also where our historical customer support and base is. And we have some 29 services directly calling here in Japan, and we're using 14 different ports of call. And to tie in with Martin's comments about interregional trade, actually we have a good mix of interregional services as well. But Yokohama has been a very key port and continues to be a very, very key port for the liner shipping industry, and particularly for one. And we have many services coming in here. So just could not help myself just mentioning that, if you don't mind. So these are the 4 topics. Update on global trade, touching back onto the IMO 220 for a more pragmatic situation where we are, temperature check, a little bit of update on digitalization and how the trends are moving, and maybe ending on a positive note with the opportunities for overall Japan industry and the shipbuilding industry here, longer term. So global trade, a busy slide, but a slide that shows all of the global trade in terms of container shipping. And what you're seeing on the screen here is a series of arrows. And the thickness of the arrow depicts the size of the trade. So obviously, if you look between Asia and North America, you have a very thick line there. That's being the Trans-Pacific head haul trade on the Trans-Pacific eastbound. And the numbers are the actual growth, so the annualized growth comparison from 12 months ago. So you can see which trades are growing and which are not growing. So let's put this in context. 2018 was a really good year for container shipping, overall growth at just over 4%. We were building up very nicely. Consumer demand was strong. We just had the US elections. We had the tax credits coming into North America, the kind of sugar high of that. And overall, everything seemed to be in a nice place, and the Europe economies were still positive, and North America moving very strongly and dragging everything along. And then 2019, we had some setbacks, particularly I think the biggest point is the North America, China, US-China trade dispute, which has unfortunately continued on and continues to continue on. And allied to that, we saw an overall slowdown, particularly in China inbound manufacturing. We saw a slowdown in Europe, and we've also seen a knock-on impact to many other countries which are in the secondary tier suppliers to these big global trade economies. So here's the picture just at the end of the first half. So this is January to June 2019. This is the latest data. And what it says overall is that the container trades are just managing to be in positive territory. Well, this is compared with 2018, where the market grew by 4%. So, we are comparing with a very strong year. But, in July, we saw a net contraction in global trade overall, and a decline in some of the manufacturing indices. Consumers generally holding up, but a lot of that inventory management got squeezed and pulled forward by a lot of the tariff activities as well. So maybe no surprise that we're seeing now in the second half some slowdown. And the biggest trade there on the Trans-Pacific trade actually is a negative growth of 2% in the first half of the year, and particularly on the westbound trade, about a 4% reduction. But there's a story within the story there, and the key part is that the China exports to the USA have come down by 6 to 7% because they've been in the crosshairs of the tariff dispute. But we've actually seen very strong growth out of Southeast Asia, so Thailand and Vietnam and Malaysia's and Indian subcontinents picked up the slack to some extent. So of every 100 containers going from Asia to the USA, about 67 of those are coming out of China. Well, that ratio is starting to change. And I think for those of us in the container shipping industry, we are just servants of the trade. We're just moving produce and goods and consumer goods around. We're very humble. We just want to get on and move our trade as safely as we can. But we will adapt and move with the times. And I'm sure that if in the event that we cannot get some breakthrough on the China-US, then we will simply have to move the freight from other markets to the end consumers. Intra-Asia slowed down, particularly imports into China, particularly here from Japan, and also Southeast Asia, a result of that manufacturing decline. The Asia-Europe trade has held up reasonably well so far, but is now somewhat more stagnant. And on the transatlantic trade, it's been pretty good for the last 2 years, but now that is in the crosshairs as well of the tariff disputes, particularly over the Boeing and Airbus issues. But I think the container shipping companies can adapt to this environment and already are working individually to align supply and demand. And recently we've seen quite a lot of blanking activity in terms of blanking voyages where there is not enough demand. And historically, that was a problem when we had 25 different shipping companies because everybody had a relatively small number of services. Today, we have 16 services on the Trans-Pacific trade, so blanking 1 or 2 of those services is not so detrimental in terms of the overall service quality for our customers to align up. So that is the kind of overall trade picture. And going into 2020, we'd like to obviously hope that the US and China developments improve, and we'd like to see a general pickup in manufacturing confidence, and hopefully that will happen. My second slide is to do with the IMO 220. And here we are almost now into November. We're just 8-9 weeks away from the 100% cutover to the low sulfur fuel requirements. This is a slide taken from the TPM conference back in February, which Robbert, Jan, and myself were also speaking at. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation about what was going to happen to the fuel price. And in the container shipping industry, we are probably burning around about 70 million tons of fuel oil a year. And by the 1st of January, probably around about 10% of the fleet will have scrubbers. So about 90% will require low sulfur fuel. So how is that going? I think in terms of the physical operation, we can see that the low sulfur fuel stocks are arriving. Down in Singapore, where I'm based, we have something like 18 VLCCs already waiting out in the anchorages with low sulfur fuel ready for the changeover. Most of the store tanks, tank storage is well stocked up with low sulfur fuels. If anything, we are seeing some shortage in the high sulfur fuels, particularly in markets like Thailand and in parts of Hong Kong and China. So we think that the physical supply is in place and is building up, and stocks in Europe and stocks in Asia should be okay. In terms of the quality and the types of fuels, we've already started onboarding now the low sulfur fuel. We've been doing a lot of checks and diligence on that front. And I would say that generally that's going okay. We've had a few instances where the final fuel that's gone into the tanks is just slightly above the 0.5, and we've had to either burn that before the 1st of January as high sulfur fuel or reject it and return it back to the bunkering company. And those small variations we think are probably due to simply the fact that the bunker tanks and the bunker vessels have still to sort of clean out and properly smooth through the low sulfur fuel. But the big one is the price. And back in the February, there was talk of between $300 to $500 spread between the high sulfur and the low sulfur. And that would obviously have a huge impact on the industry, which is burning, as I say, close to sort of 60, 70 million tons of fuel. Fortunately, whereas again, although the market is quite limited in terms of trading at the moment, but we are seeing that the low sulfur fuel price is now coming in at below marine gas oil prices, and the current spread is somewhere between 150 to 200. And let's see how that then evolves over the next 6-7 months as the whole industry moves across essentially from high reliance on the high sulfur to the low sulfur fuel. But I think just a quick checkpoint, generally going in the right direction, and hopefully a year from now we can all look back and say, well, that all went reasonably smoothly, and maybe the spread between the high and the low has come down to a much more economic level. On digitalization, the whole of our industry is going through a rapid change of moving to digitalization, moving away from a lot of analog type processes, a lot of legacy systems, and the need to upgrade and digitalize not just everything we have internally within our companies, but also being able to digitalize interfacing with all the different stakeholders in the industry, both on the operational side and through to the ports and the ship management side, but also through to the customers as well. And that journey has really started. And fortunately, when we set up the company in 2017, we were able to start from a new single global operating system on a single platform. And so that kind of allowed us to have those building blocks relatively smoothly in place. But now we're spending, alongside many other container shipping companies now, a lot of time and resource and money on digitalizing. And I would say today we're probably about 50% of our digitalization effort across all of these items that we've mentioned here on the slide are internal focused. So looking to make sure that systems are automated as much as possible, systems can talk to each other internally, and that we really start to use big data and a lot of the data that we have in our systems to make better, quicker, faster decision-making internally. And then the other 50% is really looking more external, how we link up with the stakeholders in our industry and particularly with our customers, and looking at how we can work in specific digital platforms and be able to transact now less manually, less through analog, and really going through a pure digital connection. So a lot of work on that, and no doubt we'll probably touch on that during our questions. And then lastly, we talked about the IMO 220, and Martin talked a lot about the 2040, 2050 requirements to move the whole industry forward from an oil-based power systems towards a carbon-free environment. And the I4 technology, the need to move us gradually through the gears in terms of changing the existing systems and propulsion mechanisms and energy systems that we have today, so that by 2050 we have a zero carbon footprint. And I would like to encourage and hope very much that here in Japan, that the maritime industry and the shipbuilding industry can really step up and move forward in terms of taking this as an opportunity, and not just working within the maritime industry per se, but working across different industry verticals, looking at what you've done in the automotive industry here in Japan, looking at what you've done in the aerospace, looking at what you've done in the electronics industry, and building off a lot of that digitalization and capability, and bring that into shipping. Because I do believe that however we get there, we will have to create large amounts of funds for research and development as an industry. And there's a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion now about how that should be done. And I would agree with Martin's point that just dumping carbon taxes on the industry is not the way forward. Actually, we need to somehow find these funds or resources ourselves and be able to then encourage not just the existing stakeholder players in the maritime industry to move us forward with ship design and propulsion systems and digitalization, but also encourage the best minds outside of the shipping industry as well, from other industries and from academia, to help us on that journey. So I'm going to close out there and hand over to my next colleague on the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And now it's Robbert.
Thank you. No. There we are. Good morning, everyone. I would like to join the other speakers on the panel in congratulating the Yokohama International Port Group on their 160 years of history. And I would also specifically like to thank them in helping, collaborating with us on our landside expansion in Japan, which is going ahead quite nicely. I will focus my presentation primarily on IMO 2020 and on the 2050 neutral carbon challenge, which are important topics. So the next 40 years for our industry will be truly crucial. So far, we've come a long way in terms of efficiency improvements of the global fleet, but that has effectively kept our carbon footprint where it was. It hasn't reduced our carbon footprint considerably. So you could argue on the positive side that the industry has grown and kept its carbon footprint roughly stable, but it hasn't helped reduce. So obviously a systemic change is going to be required to move us forward. And this is important because we currently live with the certainty that climate change is caused by carbon emissions, and this is not just a theory, it is actually proven in fact. We very much take our own responsibility as a global carrier, and that we realize that we are part of the solution when it comes to this, and part of the reason of these emissions, because we fully realize that we have our share in the CO2 emissions, in the SOx emissions, in the NOx emissions. So we see that as responsible business leaders, we need to play a leading role in this movement. But we cannot do it alone. It's very clear that to achieve sustaining success, we must work together, not just within the logistics industry and shipping industry, but also with the energy industry if we want to leave this planet as a better place for future generations. So as I said, two topics for my presentation today, specifically IMO 2020, and then the decarbonization of the supply chain. The decarbonization of the supply chain is actually the biggest game changer that we can see from an industry perspective. And the main challenge in achieving this actually comes from the energy industry in itself rather than the supply chain logistics industry. So we'll start with IMO 2020, significantly changing the container shipping industry. I will start by saying that it will not surprise you to hear that we fully support IMO 2020 when it comes to this, and it will help reduce the sulfur footprint of the industry by roughly 80%, and that is actually quite substantial and a really, really good news for the industry. This will be significant benefit not just to the general population, but especially those living close to ports and shipping routes. To accomplish this, it's not just the industry that needs to work on this, it is also the strong support from authorities and customers. And of course from the authorities to guarantee a level playing field between industry players. Enforcement of the IMO 2020 rules is truly crucial. The accountability and fulfillment of the promise by all stakeholders, being states, being industry, is crucial to accomplish this. We fully support the introduction of relevant and robust tools to ensure strict enforcement. In fact, we welcome it. After 2020, there should be no reason for any industry player to still work with non-compliant fuels. We see a carrier ban based on non-compliant fuels as one of the ways to enforce compliance. In terms of the recovery of the cost, we have two elements. We have a bunker surcharge that we already have in place that will be in place for long-term contracts, and then we will have something called an environmental fuel fee on the short-term contracts. I will not go into the specifics of the technicalities of that. You can refer separately if you're interested to know more. The important factor here is that we are going into virgin territory when it comes to a market for that type of fuel. Today, we need to create new supply patterns for that fuel to be available. And that is causing challenges also for the recovery, because the transition period as we move to the new fuel standard is going to be volatile. During 2019, our basic bunker formula, as is everybody in the industry, is based on 3.5% sulfur. Whereas from January 1st, the BAF tariff will be based on 0.1% gas oil with the current fixed deduction from $50 a ton. And you may wonder why we choose that as a standard rather than the 0.5, which is the industry standard. Actually, we were planning to use the 0.5 as the standard for the bunker calculation, but we clearly and quickly discovered that there is no fluid market for that type of fuel. So to reflect a use of a realistic index, we are forced to go to the 0.1 sulfur and then use a well-established index like that one and use a $50 per ton difference on the calculation. It is our ultimate plan to use the 0.5% index as the ultimate standard we would like to use, but we need that index to stabilize, and we need the market for that to be robust before we do that. When it comes to the fuel supply, I think many have already said on this panel that fuel supply is is a clear priority for this venture to be a success. And we have launched a range of initiatives to mitigate our risk as Maersk on this basis. First of all, our ultimate plan is that the first and foremost way we want to comply with IMO 2020 is to use the low sulfur fuel. That is by far the most important part of our fuel sourcing strategy. So we are preparing to switch over to that fuel for the vast majority of vessels that we operate. We've established joint ventures already with companies like Vopak, Kohle, and PBF Logistics to ensure that we have supply of the 0.5% in terms of storage and in terms of processing. We have 2 facilities already that we have contracted in the Netherlands and in New Jersey in the United States to make sure that our ships are able to have access to a solid supply of fuel. Why we chose Rotterdam and New Jersey? Because they're key ports in the global network of Maersk to make sure that the vast majority of our vessels will be able to make use of that fuel. These are investments that reduce our dependency on 0.1% marine gas oil. And so we have the supply assurances that our fleet will be able to access. As a secondary part, and I want to stress this, as a secondary part of our fuel sourcing strategy, we will use, for some vessels, scrubbers. Whilst we invested in scrubbers, we see this as a defensive move, because as I already said, the primary move is to move towards low sulfur fuel. We need to get familiar with the technology of scrubbers. Of course, the technology of scrubbers itself is not new. They're used in power plants across the world already on land side, and they are significant investments per vessel, and they add risk as the operation is still surrounded by uncertainty. But I want to stress that this is a secondary fuel sourcing policy. The primary fuel sourcing policy is simply to have an adequate supply of low sulfur fuel for the vast majority of the vessels that we have. We do see that the installation of scrubbers is going to be a challenge in the industry. You can already see that the yards that do that are quite heavily oversubscribed, and this is a challenge. In terms of the switchover of the fuel, it will happen in December 2019, and we have made an extensive plan because we have, as you know, more than 700 vessels in the fleet. We've made an extensive plan to make sure that all vessels, or the vast majority of vessels, will have switched over by the time. I won't go into the details of that. The most important part I see of this discussion today, and the presentation also that I have today, is around getting to zero. This is something where we see that we should play one of the leading roles, if not the leading roles in the industry, to try and decarbonize shipping, because it is so important to the livelihood of all of us. Shipping is roughly responsible for 2 to 3% of global emissions, and that is quite important. And we do recognize the role that we have as an industry to play in the decarbonization and in the environment. I should say that, to put this in perspective, if you would buy an iPad today and you would drive from your home in the UK to London to pick up that iPad yourself, you would spend more CO2 just picking up that iPad in London than it would take to ship that iPad from China to Europe in a container. So I also think that in terms of the individual impact of CO2 on the environment, we need to look at short sea versus or short transport versus long transport, and the economies of scale that long transport brings. However, as an integrator of container logistics, we see the challenge of the carbon emissions to be a supply chain challenge, not just an ocean challenge. So it's the end-to-end CO2 emission and sulfur emission that is important for us to keep into account. So what have we done? So far, we have roughly kept our global CO2 emissions constant since 2008. So in terms of our total CO2 emissions as a Maersk shipping business, we have roughly kept it constant. You could argue that that's an achievement because we have grown so much since then. So, but we've grown by 41%, roughly keeping CO2 emissions stable. So you could argue that we've reduced our CO2 emissions per container by 41% since 2008. However, that's nowhere near where we want to be as an industry. We want to be essentially coming to zero by 2050. And by 2030, we want to have achieved 60% reduction versus the baseline of 2008 that I already mentioned. We are doing various different initiatives on that. Some have been published, like the use of biofuel. Others are still under study and will be divulged at the right time. The current target that we have covers ocean only. We are in the process of developing an end-to-end target, but this is still relatively new because we are not an asset owner in other modes of transport. So we will have to work towards that as we continue. So how do we get to a carbon neutral solution? It's both a pledge from my side and a call to action to everybody who's listening in or everybody who reads the media articles that I assume will be published based on this event. So first of all, I've already said that this is a partnership where the industry has to do its job in terms of reducing the carbon footprint. But the energy industry is a major element of the success of this movement. So we must have innovative fuel solutions to meet the demand, and they must be implemented. We need sustainable fuels. We have some examples of them. We have worked with some examples of them, but the choice and the financial viability of these efficient fuel solutions is still in the future. So we believe that if you think of a vessel as the target of your sustainability and as the subject of the discussion, we think that actually in achieving sustainable shipping, 20% of that discussion is around the vessel, and 80% of that discussion is on land. It's in R&D in sustainable fuels, it's in the production and storage of sustainable fuels, it's in the pipeline networks to make the fuel available, and it's in the innovation of creating new sustainable fuels for our industry. We are not particularly biased towards one technology. We have worked with ideas as biofuel, which I already mentioned. We've had a voyage from Europe to Asia running exclusively on biofuel. We are looking at hydrogen, we're looking at electricity, we're even looking at wind power and solar power. But as the vessel investment cycle is 20 to 25 years, the need to find a solution has to be found soon, because we're investing for a long period of time, and an investment, once it's made, as you know, cannot easily be changed. The zero carbon target will require significant innovation on the fuel side to make this happen. And we must have a carbon neutral vessel in terms of a design ready by 2030 to order to scale up to be carbon neutral by 2050. So that doesn't leave us a lot of time. I already said shipping cannot do this alone. We need the collaboration from industry, from government, and also from customers. Many of the customers globally have in their core messages that they are sustainable companies, that they want to be environmentally active. So this is also the time where we call upon those companies to support their mission statements and to support carbon neutral shipping when it comes to that. It is a public-private partnership to endure the success of this. It's currently a coalition of more than 60 companies, the Getting to Zero coalition, that is within maritime, it is within energy, it is within infrastructure and within finance, supported by the key governments and NGOs. And I think the Poseidon Alliance was already mentioned today. Finance will play its part. So when it comes to the wrap-up, as you can hear, we strongly support it. How could we not strongly support it, since it's such an important environmentally friendly message to the world. During the transition, we will have to do the right thing. It will not be a perfect world. There will be various things that we have to test out as we do it, but we will use the right way, and we will use the right technology to do this. To get to a carbon neutral society by 2050 in terms of ocean shipping, we will have to innovate considerably compared to where we are today, and we must find new fuels and new fuel solutions to do this. And getting to zero will require the collaboration of all the industry players involved. Thank you. If I can use 1 minute of the time, I wanted to correct the chairman on one point of his speech where he said that blockchain had not proceeded very fast within the shipping industry. I would like to correct that statement in that I think it's roughly 60% of all global container shipping has signed up to the TradeLand solution. That is a joint venture between IBM and Maersk. So the progress is definitely there, and we hope to accelerate that progress even further. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tadaaki Naito, president of the Japanese Shipowners Association, as well as the chairman of the NYK line. It's a great honor for me to join these sessions because, you know, in Japan, the NYK and the port of Yokohama historically has a long relationship. And I'm very pleased to sit down here in the session on the occasion of the 160th anniversary. Now, I have the 3 topics to be presented at this session in terms of the challenges for the maritime industry. Firstly, I would like to briefly introduce the activities of the Japanese Shipowners Association. After that, I'd like to show you the case study made by the NYK line. First one is the first trial of the maritime autonomous surface ship in accordance with the IMO's interim guidelines. Case study 2, in this session topics, e-money platform for cashless settlement on board. Those are a bit different from the zero carbon ships or zero carbon emission, but there might be some relation with the zero carbon issue. So let me move on the next page. First of all, I'd like to show you the size of the JSA, Japanese Ship Owners Association. The number of the members, 126, and they are operating 2,830 ships, gross ton-wise 100 million tons. So I would say that we have occupied not a small, substantial position in the shipping society. That's the size of the JSA. Now, as long as environmental challenges is concerned, first of all, the shipping industry has been developing innovative technologies for minimizing environmental impact through the collaboration with the consignees, shipbuilders, and maritime equipment manufacturers. With a history of the promoting SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, the industry is convinced that the further contribution will add more business value. Accordingly, the Japanese Ship Owners Association strive to create more value to the maritime transport services by promoting environmental protections. So let's see, the addressing environmental impact relating vessel operations. Our activities are mainly based on the IMO, International Maritime Organization, and we fully support IMOs as an organizer of the shipping industry. Actually, together with the Japanese government and International Chamber of Shipping, we JSA voice out our opinion in IMO. Also, the discussions and resolutions of the IMO are shared in a timely manner by the members. We ask the members to comply fully with the rules and regulations in IMO. We also provide the information for the shippers and the Japanese societies. That's our activities. And according to the SDGs guidelines, we JSA focus on 5 items in environmental issues. The first one is air pollution, focusing on the SOx and NOx PM. Secondly, climate change, focusing on the greenhouse gas. Thirdly, resource recycling, as you know, scraps and hazardous materials. The fourth, the marine pollution, focusing on the oil, recently on the microplastics. Fifth, the biodiversity, invasive species. Well, we are doing our, how should I say, best for the environmental issue, and the JSA would be a basis to cope with these issues. This is a brief introduction of JSA's challenges towards the environmental issue. Let me move on to the next slide. Wait a minute. Apart from the JSA activities, each member line in the association has been developing their challenges in a specific item. Today, among others, I introduced the latest challenges of the NYK line for your information. The case study 1, first trial of the Maritime autonomous surface ship in accordance with the IMO's interim guidelines. NYK has actually conducted the trial of the Maritime autonomous surface ship, and this is the first trial in the world to be carried out in accordance with the IMO rules. NYK intended to realize its target of manned autonomous ships for safer operations and reduction in crew workload. Actually, the trial was conducted in September. It took about 18 hours. Also, the trial is made by the larger NYK-operated pure car truck carriers, Iris Leader. Generally, the ship is come across the other ships in the ocean navigation. And during this trial, the Iris Leader, the ship, automatically made countermeasures to avoid the risk of collision. It made 20 times automatically change the, how should I say, route, navigation. Oh, sorry. Oh, maybe one slide is omitted, so I tell you. Well, we expect from this trial the effect of the manned autonomous ships. 3 effects. One is a work style reform, reduction in crew workload. 2, safety, to prevent accident. 3, efficiency, optimal operation could be realized. And I underline that the 3 elements are necessary for the further development of the manned autonomous ships. One is the advanced technology to support navigation. Secondly, the advanced technology to predict engine plants and accident. Thirdly, the communication and cyber securities. Those 3 elements can be applied to the future remote controlled and unmanned autonomous ships. And the trial I mentioned, gives us an first one element, advanced technology to support navigation. NYK want to continue the trial in the future to pursue the other 2 elements. Next, case study 2, e-money platform for cashless settlement on board. As long as the money settlement is concerned, there are still several problems on board, such as loads of the money are piled up on board. We estimate around $800 million on board. International remittance takes a great deal of cost and time. For example, the remittance from company to vessels, from crew to family, etc. Thirdly, the cash management takes time. Cash management requires an effort and risks of managing large number of money. In addition, within the restriction of the communication environment, it's not so easy job in general. The answer is problem can be solved with the cashless settlement using the e-money. How seafarers spend money right now? Receiving salary on board, purchasing daily goods on board, shopping at fair disembarked, remittance for family at port of calls or fair disembarked. Those are sometimes tough or nuisance. Now, solution. Well, in association with the Accenture as a system provider, and also Citibank as a financial facilities, NYK has established the new business model named Marco Pay. By the way, Marco Pay stands for the Maritime Community Pay, so shortly Marco Pay. The idea is vessel management companies deposit money to Marco Pay, and Marco Pay will remit the money, salary, to the captain, crews by e-money. And crew can buy the goods on board by e-money, and also they can remit the money to their family in Japan or in Philippines. And also the crews can withdraw the money at ATM services onshore during port stay. Also, their family can withdraw the cash from the local bank ATM services. Also, the participated partners, stores, providing another service for families, also cruised. MarcoPay can connect seafarers to the society and enterprise, bridge between seafarers and society. For example, seafarers accessible to the financial products and service which was not available up to now. They are also accessible to highly beneficial and convenient product service. On the other hand, society and enterprise obtained an excellent customer base as seafarers with financial strength. And also they create new business opportunities targeting seafarers. That's the brief sketch of the MarcoPay. Now, this is the end of my presentation. I hope those are interesting to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oops, I think I'm dragging my... So, you'll be pleased to know I don't have a presentation. I was co-opted at the last minute here, but I'm just going to give a couple of comments to the main challenges and issues that we've been discussing here today. And, you know, from a company that has one of our brands at 100 and, I just checked it now, 182 years old, and another one at 181 years old, congratulations to the Port of Yokohama at 160 years old. And Moroka-san, thank you very much for inviting me here today. Carnival, we have 104 cruise ships, I think. We delivered one last week. We serve 3 million meals a day. So just to give you some kind of idea of the scale of what we're doing, we have 20 ships on order, 10 of which are LNG fueled. And the biggest challenge I think we all face today is the environmental challenge, particularly in our segment. We're under a lot of pressure continuously around emissions, around overcrowding, around port infrastructure. And this is something that I think we're going to see more and more of. It's clearly an area where sustainability is core to the business that we're in. And we're a little different from the other sectors that have been here today, but the challenges are very similar. I think the other one that we really haven't spoken about is manpower, resources and training, but that's not really the focus of this discussion today. So, I think if we look at the targets we've got for 2020, I suppose if I look at my company, a little bit different from some of the others, because we operate within eco-zones pretty much most of the time. We have 78% of our fleet already fitted with advanced air quality systems. We burn around about 3.5 million tons of fuel a year. About 1% of that is LNG today, and that's going to increase as we move into these 10 new ships that we have on order between now and 2025, which are LNG fueled. And we see more and more of those ships coming into the market space. We believe LNG is a great long-term bridge. I think I fully agree with the comments we've had from other speakers that for us to meet a 50% reduction by 2050 or 100% by 2050, if we're to believe what's coming out of some of the communities we operate in, or even 2030 from our Norwegian friends, we do need to have zero-emission vessels coming into operation by 2030 or in the 2030s. We need to continue to develop and invest in new technology. Batteries have a place. We're trialing the first 10-megawatt battery pack on one of our ships in the coming years. We're looking at fuel cells. I'm not personally convinced ammonia is the solution to everything. Having spent part of my career taking ammonia off our ships, I find it quite difficult to see how we're going to put it back on. And I'm also concerned, and despite being told by everybody that ammonia is available in every single port of the world, it's not available as a fuel in the quantities we need. And with the toxicity it has, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen if we ever have a collision between two ammonia fuel ships or ammonia bunker vessels. But I'm an engineer, and I believe we can always come up with solutions. I believe that we will find solutions to the challenge if we put our mind to it. In the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 meetings with Extinction Rebellion, and I'm being told that if we're not carbon neutral by 2025, then we haven't achieved what we need to achieve. I can be certain that we're not going to have zero-emission ships by 2025. Our order book is full through 2027. We're building ships today which will last for 30 to 40 years. And I think what Martin showed in his graphs, I think what we've seen from some of the other speakers here today, we're going to need to have this transition. I think in the 2030s, we perhaps can begin to deliver the first zero-emission vessels. If we don't, we're not going to meet the 50% by 2050. And certainly not the 100% by 2050. I've mentioned the 2020. We fully support the implementation at the IMO of 2020. And I go as far as to say that if the industry hadn't stood up and said they wanted a solution, then it would have never happened. I think it's very clear that the industry helped move things along in the right direction. And I think in the greenhouse gas debate, the industry has to stand up and invest. We clearly see LNG as a pathway forwards. There's a lot of people who talk about methane slip, but I'm also a believer in that we can reduce that, we can solve those problems, and we can move it forward. And then who knows, maybe we're going to have sufficient bio-LNG, maybe we're going to have sufficient energy to X in the future. As renewables get cheaper, perhaps it's nuclear. Who knows? It's an exciting time for all of us. But it's not just what we do on board the vessels. It is not just what we do as ship owners. We have to bring the rest of the ports and communities and the supply chain along with us. I often ask at conferences like this, how many of you drive an electric car? How many of you have invested in solar panels in your own home? To the point that we heard earlier, it's about making individual choices. And I think society is demanding more and more of us, and we have to respond to that. And particularly in my sector, where we're B2C, customers have a very easy habit of walking and voting with their feet. And for us to continue, we have to continue to develop. I think we've got a great opportunity here. I think there's a lot of good things to talk about, but I'm not going to spend a lot more time talking about the subject. I'm going to leave this now to the panel debate so we can answer your questions, and hopefully we're going to have some exciting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. The Slido code is up there. There are a few coming in now, and there's a bit of a theme developing. So let's go back and just test with 2020 the steps that are coming in. And Martin, I think you talked about slow steaming. One of the questions we have in front of us is, and I'll find it in a minute, Martin said we should slow the fleet down from 14 to 10 knots, but what does that do for supply and demand? Will it not be filled by the entrepreneurs immediately by putting more ships to steam more slowly if it's 10 knots? I know all my friends in Greece will be watching that opportunity extremely closely. Yeah. So, is that a risk?
Well, whether you describe it as a risk or not, I don't know. I think the Greeks see it as an opportunity, and as you rightly say, at the moment, when I, like many others, run calculations on the supply and demand for the fleet, both across the whole world fleet, and we have on paper about 20% surplus capacity at the moment, and that's based on the fleet going at design speed, which is 85% MCR basically. That's the assumption there. And if we did that, we would have 20% of spare capacity. But the 85% MCR is based on bunker prices and calculations that were made when bunkers were much cheaper relatively to the cost of the ship, the daily cost of the ship, than they are today. I mean, until 2008, the bunkers cost about, if you took the daily cost of the ship in dollars per day, and then you took the comparative daily cost of the bunkers steaming at 85% MCR, you found that the bunkers was only about 25 to 30% of the cost of the ship. Whereas today, at $450, $500 a ton, the ship and the bunkers cost about the same. That's based on chartering rates for ships. And so the whole economic equation has changed. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that the bulk fleet has settled down today at about 11 knots steaming, is not just because there's surplus. There is technically surplus capacity, and at the sort of prices that tankers are chartering for today, technically they would be better off if they speeded up. But you have to get the charters to agree with that, and the charterers don't seem to want to, so they are carrying on steaming at a slow rate. So I think the answer to that particular question is it's a mixture of regulations and economics. And there's big companies like Maersk that must be doing this calculation, and Ocean Express all the time. And I imagine as we move forwards, we're moving from an era when you built the ship for an optimum speed, which was as fast as it went, and you always tried to trade it at that speed, to a new era where you should be adjusting your speed of the ship continuously insofar as you can within the service obligations. And that's a big change in the operation of the industry. I don't know what colleagues on the panel think about that.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, at the end of the day, in the container shipping sector, we're moving collectively about 120 million containers a year around the world. And I keep coming back to this point, at the end of the day, we are the servants of global trade. So we will move what needs to be moved or what ultimately our customers want. And I think there are certain commodities today which could take a longer transit time. But a lot of the products that we move today are consumer goods. They are key components in manufacturing. They are cold chain produce. And we just go back to some of us in this audience here who were involved back in the 1980s, 1990s with container shipping. And we used to do 16 days transit from Singapore to Hamburg. And we used to do it out of Hong Kong. We used to do it in 20 days. Well, today, those transit times now are around about sort of 25 to 28 days. So we've already actually effectively slowed down when we had the last oil shock. And when we look at what our end consumers are doing today, people are buying less but more frequently. And so in the Asia-Europe trade today, we have something like, we've gone from like 45 services a week down to about 21 services a week, and those services have got slower, and yet the consumer at the other end, through their e-commerce behavior and the way that retail works these days, are buying less more often. So how do we get that difference in philosophy and thinking into supply chain? So yes, of course we could slow down if that's what ultimately our customers want, but the impact on the supply chain in terms of needing to have much larger warehousing and distribution, much more inventory in the supply chain would have quite a material impact. But I do come back to Martin's point, which is at the end of the day, maybe they're not paying the true cost of their global, of their environmental footprint today. And if you factor that in, that would change a whole different philosophy in terms of the way that some of these supply chains would be built. But whatever it is, I believe we could adapt to that in due course.
Should we just follow the money for a moment? Because that's really at the core.
Could I just add one point?
Yeah.
I mean, when I looked at what shipper surveys were saying, the impression I got was that their first requirement was reliability.
True.
True. And their second requirement, and speed was, they can live with slow delivery as long as they know which day it will arrive. And so the two are not incompatible. You could possibly find that your shippers are quite happy shipping small quantities over much longer delivery times, as long as they are absolutely sure that it will arrive on that day. And that comes back to quality standards, which I'm sure, which in fact Mr. Naito talked about, and which is one of the great things that you get out of autonomous ships, is you make your quality assurance systems work in a way which I'm sure bothers both of you guys a lot.
So I want to make the connection between slow steaming and the decarbonization. Our standpoint is actually that although obviously slower speeds reduce carbon emissions, it also favors old inefficient vessels in the fleet. Yeah. And it does not replace the need to truly innovate technologically to decarbonize, rather than just to reduce the burden on the old vessels by allowing them to sail slower. So if it's a mandatory speed reduction, actually it should go more into a mandatory innovation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'd fully agree in that from our sector. We've slowed our ships down. We've found that helps looking at itineraries. But there's a lot of pressure, and okay, we're in a completely different world in the cruise industry. Without having different destinations, you don't sell the product. But innovation is key to this. You've got to continue to innovate. You've got to make the hard choices, look very, very carefully. We have thousands and thousands of data points on our ships, which were just sitting there idly until about 5 years ago. Now we collect everything, we put it in the cloud, we analyze it. We have our fleet operations centers looking at what we do. We're able to look very, very closely. We've invested in air lubrication systems. We're investing in how we look at the heat recovery rates, etc. You've got to continue to innovate, because at the end of the day, it's good. It reduces your fuel bill, it reduces your emissions. I think in our case, it comes straight off the bottom line. And as fuel price increases, you're going to see that. So I believe speed optimization is a much better term than speed reduction.
So going back to what I was going to suggest a moment ago, following the money, I mean, represented here, Martin and myself aside, are some big corporations with huge, huge budgets, compared to what you might call the other half of shipping, the entrepreneurial bulk operators, who don't have the budget. So how do you bring them up to the same level as you guys, the big corporates? Are you going to help them? Anyone like to?
I think it comes back to regulation. When it comes to power limitations to engines, when it comes to emission standards, a level playing field can only be created by regulation. In free market competition, if there's no oversight, people will do what's financially interesting, and so the oversight and the governance is crucial, and we support that wholly. I mean, we welcome more scrutiny, more governance on this front.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think just coming back to the customer side, today I think that the customer will be presented much more in the future with, they'll look at any particular shipment and the discussion will be around, what is the cost of moving it from A to B under 3 or 4 different options? What are the different transit times of those 3 or 4 different options? And then what is the carbon footprint of those 3 or 4 options? And I think that's where we'll get much more optimization in the decision making of the end customer. And if the customer starts de-emphasizing transit time and putting environmental footprint over the cost of shipment, then we could start to see a swing more towards physical demand to slow down the network. But so far we're not seeing that, but that may come.
Tom, what about your customers? What do they expect from you when they come on board?
A good time, a phenomenal experience, exceeding their expectations. That's what it is. We don't see, I have to say, the Ida Nova, which is our first LNG fuel ship, we've got a phenomenal amount of interest on board from the customers as to what LNG is, what it means for the environment. But I have to say, when you ask most surveys that we've done would demonstrate that environment is not necessarily a choice for making decisions. I think that's going to change. I think as we see, if I just take my own family, my children, They're at the age now where they'll be thinking about their vacation experiences, and I'm hoping they'll choose cruise for some of their vacation experience, but they certainly will begin to look at what their impact is going to be. But yes, I think that the negatives actually outweigh the positives in this case. You know, if you're seen as not being clean or not being green, then you're going to see that that's going to make a big difference. And we're seeing more and more engagement at that level, I think, today. You know, we've all suffered, I think, in the industry with the protesters outside ports, outside harbours. We see it in Southampton, where I'm based, on the cruise ships, but also up in the container terminal, people asking a lot of questions as to why we're not doing more to invest in shoreside infrastructure. Where's the cold ironing facilities that we all have been asking for? Why aren't all the container movement equipment, why isn't it all electric or hydrogen or something else today? So there's a massive amount of public pressure that's going to come to bear. And we have to be ready for that, and we have to respond. And to the point, part of it will be regulation, but part of it will also be done through doing the right thing.
Yes.
Because doing the right thing at the end of the day should result in better passenger revenues from our particular perspective and more people coming on board.
Very good. I'm going to pick up one or two more of the questions that are now coming in on Slido. Picking up on the autonomous ship trials that MYK have conducted, questions come in from Andrew Varga. Is Maersk trialing autonomous ships at the moment, Robbert?
Not that I'm involved in, but you'd have to ask the technology center in Copenhagen.
They did they worked with Rolls-Royce on the original one that they took all the world's press out on an autonomous ship in last year, was it? Earlier this year, well, January.
And perhaps one for Naito-san. Were you happy with the trial?
Well, actually, it's a first time for us. And the result is requiring us to do more. I mean, 20 times we have just ship automatically change the course according to the some mathematics or something. But well, to be honest, it's a kind of, how should I say, model. Of course, sometimes things are moving on beyond the model. We need something to improve. That's our, how should I say, observation. We try to do more for the improvement. Yeah. Still, it's not, how should I say, 100% workable.
Where is autonomous shipping going to fit in the future, Martin?
Well, it's interesting because it seems to me the problem with the autonomous ship as an entity is that you're starting at the most difficult thing. It's like I'm saying I'm going to start mountaineering, and the first thing I'm going to climb is Everest, and then we'll get down to the little hills on the background, you know. Whereas I think my sense, coming from a shipbuilding background, is that there are a number of systems on board the ship. And one of the great advantages of automation is that if you can automate, you make your QA systems work, because you can't automate without making your QA systems work. And the minute you make your QA systems work, according to Peter Drucker, who wrote a lot about this in the 1980s, you save 30%. Just things you never thought about. And I do think that the great challenge for the shipbuilders is to find ways to deal with the automations of systems. For example, cargo management systems, ballast cargo loading, unloading on tankers, thousands of valves and things. These, you know, we need standards and automated systems on the ship.
Yes. And as those systems improve, perhaps not fully autonomous, how are you going to address the skilling of your crew and shore staff to address this? What steps are you taking now? Should we go down the line?
Well, actually, you know, we are not aiming at no man on board. I mean, some crew or captains are still on board, because you know, as I mentioned, sometimes you know, extraordinary things may happen in the navigation or some you know, many aspects. So we are relying on the autonomous systems and machines, but still under manned control. That's our ideas.
But even in that world, people are using new systems, new approaches, and they're going to need new skills. So the investment has to go there. So
I suppose if I take our sector, we're fortunate enough to have invested in our own training facility in the Netherlands, the Sea Smart Center, where we have 4 full mission simulators, both for bridge and engine room. We've got an LNG bunker rig in there. For the first time ever, we were able to put the new ship's automation in the training center before delivery, not as usually happens after delivery. And we were able to train everybody on those systems. You know, there's what we call knobology. You have to know which knobs to twiddle in the right way, in the right fashion, you know, because if you put a new officer who's never been, you know, we all have today in our industry integrated bridge management systems together linked to the automation in the engine room. We've segregated out our hotel automation because it could be over demanding on people. And so what we've done is we put there's a lot of automation, but the people still are integral to this process, absolutely integral to it. I don't think we're ever going to see an autonomous cruise ship, I have to say.
No.
But that being said, you know, the level of automation is massive, and training is absolutely critical. And the thing you have with facilities like we've got, and I'm sure Maersk and others will have these, is you have the opportunity to run tests and trials in degraded scenarios, and you can make sure that you practice these events. And we've taken a huge amount of learning from the airline industry here. We've turned our bridge management systems on their heads. We no longer have the captain being the only person who manages the levers. You have an integrated bridge management team where people think aloud. It's a massive area, and it's a huge amount of investment, but it really pays rewards. And what we see is we see more educated people. We see people who have got better skills. We see improvements in their retention rates. We see improvements in reliability, less incidents and less accidents. And the P&I clubs love it.
Oh, we do. Robbert, what about?
Like I said, I'm not at all involved in the technical fleet management side of things.
So
I defer the question to the technical experts if that comes on.
Yeah, I think, I think we're all in agreement that there are still far too many accidents at sea. Safety is still not at a level that is acceptable to the industry. And so many times we see accidents are due to human error. And I think we need to look at a lot of these automation AI-type solutions which are being trialed now by people like Maersk and MYK very positively as being a potential aid or support to the bridge team to try to reduce the number of collisions and try to avoid accidents. But I think, as we all know, whether we still need officers and crew on our ships, whether it's to look after the passengers and entertain them, or whether it's to deal with a breakdown or a malfunction of machinery on our ships, because our ships just don't have that latent redundancy built into them where they've got 2 or 3, 4 engines or 2 or 3 propellers, etc. So we have to deal with the breakdown situation still. And also, as we've known in the container shipping business, we have still far too many fires on the ship, still too many cargo problems. And that's where we again need our officers and crew very bravely to be able to try to put the fire out as quickly as possible and save the ship. So I think we're a long way away from autonomous ships, but I think a lot of the technology and ideas being put forward can be used very positively to de-risk or reduce the accidents that we have in the marine environment. But I don't see any immediate jump to crew-free ships in the next 10 years.
Back to carbon for a moment. And something that I'm personally interested in. Offsets, how big a part should that play in the process of helping to get to zero? What role do you think it plays? How about you?
I'd like to think that the path towards zero carbon emissions should be one of efficiency and fuel saving and alternative fuels. The moment you go, I'm not saying that the path on compensation shouldn't be there, but the moment you go that way, you're basically not challenging yourself to improve. You're sort of offsetting it with something else. I'm not saying it shouldn't be part of the solution, but I think Maersk would like to think that the primary thrive should be to basically be...
Do you offer your customers that opportunity?
We have in the past, and the uptake has been very poor, I have to say.
Yeah.
I think it's something that it has a part to play, but the first part of this needs to be exactly as we just said, investing in efficiency and in technology. Now, if an offset was linked to something that's directly linked to our segment and our sector, so if you could invest in something that, for example, was funding clean energy imports, shore power, etc., then I could see a much closer linkage.
Okay, yeah.
So I think there's room for them, but it shouldn't be your first stop. I think that's the challenge. We all want to do the right thing, and is this the right first message?
It doesn't sound like it. Couple of questions that come in on the role of the Poseidon Principles and the Getting to Zero coalition. What impact will they have, both of those initiatives, do we think?
Well, I think the key thing, Hugo, is that I think we all recognize that no individual company can lift this burden of finding a technological breakthrough to the carbon-free fuel issue. So we have to have industry collaboration, we have to have industry consensus, and we have to work together to find these solutions and to finance these solutions. So I think the Getting to Zero coalition is something that further tries to reinforce that requirement of the industry and the stakeholders to come together and show that we are really all committed to doing something about this. And now we're into the process of the how do we do that? So the Getting to Zero is a requirement of the IMO. It's also all over our websites, and of course we're all going to have that all over our websites, but it's the actual doing rather than the saying, and it's getting to the doing. And what we have to do is to try and create that industry momentum, so that the regulators are not going to be imposing that on us and then coming up with all sorts of strange ways of raising funds, and maybe those funds not coming back to the industry. We have to take control of our own destiny as an industry. And I think that a lot of the major operators in our industries across the different shipping sectors now recognize that, and we are probably getting closer and closer towards some kind of global initiative to find some way to create some funding, to create some R&D, to help us ensure that we move towards what Martin showed in his very well prepared slides, that we need to go for this step approach. So phase one we get, phase two is kind of on the drawing boards, but how do we invest now in the R&D technology to get us smoothly through phase two and into phase three? So I think it's really positive, and I think if we can show as an industry that we are moving forward and we're really committed, that's great.
Something more than tokenism. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I guess the counterpart to Jeremy's point is that from history, you also need entrepreneurs. I mean, if you go back to the steam revolution, which I was talking about at the genesis of Yokohama's time, the person who really made the steam engine work for shipping was Alfred Holt. And he was an ex-railway engineer who came into shipping and had the nerve to build a ship with a 60-pound boiler when everybody else's boilers were 10 pounds. And they were quite happy with them. They couldn't see why he wanted this very, very risky 60-pound boiler on the ship. But you needed that to get from Europe to Asia. You needed an efficient... And I think then later on we saw the same thing with Malcolm McLean in the container business. You know, he started in 56. And really, it was the Sealand innovation which really pushed the existing operators into the container business and showed that it could be done. And so I think there's a place for sitting around the table and agreeing what we're going to do. But I also think there's a place for people who are getting out and doing what the Americans call kicking ass, you know?
Yeah, and the rubber's got to hit the road. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about, you know, actually raising real funds within the industry and then using those funds for real R&D programs where we're not just encouraging existing stakeholders within the shipping industry, but we're looking to try and encourage other technological bright minds and academia and research to come in and help us to find that carbon-free fuel.
So as we move through your world, Martin, along to the end of that graph, what is the zero carbon solution that lies at the end of the rainbow? Who's got the answer to that? Which fuel is it? Naito-san.
Well, actually, you know, we are talking about zero emission, but I think that zero is the ultimate goal. But real target would be a reduce in the emissions. I don't mind 0 or 0.5% or something. So the important thing would be, you know, trying to our best to reduce an emission, providing their own, how should I say, know-how, technology, or depending on your, you know, society or company, or that's important. And well, Yokohama would be a place where we appeal it to the world, right?
Very good. Tom, what do you think?
So I think it's a great question. I think the question should also be, what is zero? Because if you use hydrogen, you're emitting other emissions. You know, we're facing a challenge today in the Norwegian fields where we're being asked to have zero emissions by 2026, but the regulator at the moment can't define what they mean by zero emissions.
Yes.
So does it mean that we can have we can put in biofuel and we operate on biofuel? Have we got the certification that is necessary there? Have we got the infrastructure, etc.? So I don't know the answer to that. I just know that we're on a journey at the moment, and we're all working, to the points that have been raised before, we're working together in a way that I've not seen before in this industry to find those solutions. And it's not just R&D, I think. We've got to be looking at the whole supply chain. We've got to be looking at the infrastructure, and you've got to be looking at real practical trials of some of this stuff.
And you hope that the competition authorities don't take a ridiculous line on that level of collaboration. Martin, you were itching to say something there.
Well, absolutely. Picking up on Tom's point, I think one of the problems that we have is that in today's world, all of your corporations are run by your financial departments in reality. And one of the problems is that conventional management accounts don't measure these things. And let me give you an example. Last couple of years ago, I went to a conference run by Inmarest on condition-based maintenance, which is a truly good thing to do. And quite a few of the people there were companies that were selling condition-based maintenance. And they said that it was impossible to sell it because when you went to the finance director, he wanted two-year payback. But the problem was that the condition-based, the financial systems don't measure things that don't happen. For example, if your chemical tanker breaks down, or your container ship breaks down in the middle of the Pacific, then you actually maybe cost you $150,000, and that goes on your bottom line. If you put in condition-based maintenance, and as a result of that, the fuel pump doesn't fail, and the ship doesn't break down, then there is nothing. There's no profit shown in your P&L. And so the big cost you've spent on condition-based maintenance is not reflected on the bottom line. And that is a massive problem for the people managing corporations. So we need to learn to value added, and that should in some way include carbon.
Yes. Yeah. Jeremy, what's the end of your
so I think if you look at Martin's sort of phase 3, where we need to have found the solution, have that starting to be coming through by 2035, effectively. Yeah. So one has to, hope that with this great intense R&D effort that I hope will really take place over the next 10 years, we make some amazing breakthrough whereby we can come up with a fuel type which is carbon-free. Just say it's synthetic LNG or it's synthetic hydrogen or whatever it is. If we can do that, then we can have ships pretty much as they are today with an engine on board, with a fuel type on board, which is carbon free. And that will allow us to be able to run the deep sea ships as well as the interregional type ships. If we can't, and if the regulators really say it has to be carbon free, then we have to go to electric batteries.
Yeah.
Now, by then, one would hope that maybe the electric batteries, in terms of storage capacity efficiency, are 10 times better than they are today. But that will help. That allows the interregional, it allows the interport activity probably to run off batteries. But for the deep sea trades, which I think will still continue to exist, continent to continent, we will not be able to operate the size of ships that Robbert, Jan, and myself, and Tom, and the rest of us are running with batteries. Simply, the battery would be the size almost of the ship itself, being towed behind. So then, one has to then say, okay, if that is really the outcome, ships may then have to become smaller.
That's really fascinating.
And that is a paradigm change for so much of our ports industry and shipping and the whole way that we work. So I hope we can find that magic breakthrough on the fuel type to allow us to continue to have big, fast, efficient ships with a carbon neutral footprint that is acceptable to the world. But if we can't, and we have to go battery, we can find regional solutions for battery-powered ships, but we can't find deep-sea solutions.
Robert.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what Dr. Stopford said about following the money, and you said it as well. Some would have said a couple of years ago that IMO 2020 was never going to happen. It was going to be a disaster. Nobody would comply with it, and yet here we are. I would also like to think that there's talk about carbon tax, there's talk about carbon pricing. I think at the end of the day, if the regulatory environment is such that there is a hard stop and a hard deadline, I think the industry will come around collectively with the Poseidon principles, with technological innovation, and will find a solution for this. And it could very well be, as Jeremy says, moving to a different type of vessel. But when there's a hard stop, the industry usually comes to its senses and does things.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be nuclear.
Don't know. It may not be in our segment, but there's a lot of interesting work going on right now with new technology. And if you think of the safety record that it has, but who knows?
I remember 2 Soviet Lash carriers, the first 2 nuclear-powered carriers, and they were fine, except they couldn't get into any port apart from their home port. So trade was fairly narrow. We're coming close to the end. Let me have another look at the questions as they've come in. I think I've covered quite a few of them. What about as we come to 12:10? What about one's personal approach? How many electric cars on the panel? Hands up.
How about no car?
No car.
No car.
No car. Very good. No car.
Bicycle. Yeah.
Very good.
Bicycle.
Very good. And what steps you're taking at home personally? What just to show willing, because obviously that transmits through to your own staff. So, Tom.
So I put solar panels on my home. I'm always looking to see what is the constituents of my power supply at home. I'm sure they do divert the green electrons to my property, but no, I think it's important that you make personal steps and you look at what you do. We're all committed to reducing single-use plastics, I think, in our homes and things like that. Single-use plastic, sorry. And I think, yes, we're taking the steps we can. And my next car will be an electric car, that's for sure. I'll link it to my solar panels, and it makes sense.
Martin's a farmer as well as an economist. What are you doing with your cows?
Yeah, no, I'm teaching them to breathe into plastic bags.
Not just breathe.
But I did, though. I have another good. I invested. I was one of the biggest investor in the first wind farm in the UK in 1990, and that has been a wonderful investment. So I would encourage you all to do innovative stuff, because you can certainly make money out of it.
Very good. Thank you, Martin. Well, I don't know. We're at 12:10, which I think was the given hour. So on behalf of the moderator, anyway, I'd like to offer our thanks to the panel here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.